So if you didn't remember how, or you didn't know how to spell DNA or RNA, there you go. Deoxyribonucleic acid. It's not that bad. Usually if you can say it, you can spell it. Deoxyribonucleic acid. And then RNA, the ribonucleic acid. Yes, they contain carbon, they contain oxygen, they contain hydrogen, they contain nitrogen, your top 4 elements, John. And they also contain phosphorus, which is one of the top 6. Now, nucleic acids are polymers. Remember what poly means? Many. So it means it's a big long chain of something. The monomers, what does the mono mean? 1. And so the monomers that are strung together, the little individual things that are strung together to make DNA, are nucleotides. So we string nucleotides together to make up DNA. The nucleotide is the monomer that we string together to make a polymer known as DNA. Now, these nucleotides that we string together are composed of 3 basic things. A nitrogen base, a sugar, we call it a pentose sugar because the pent means 5. There's 5 carbons in it, so it's a 5-carbon sugar. And it contains a phosphate group. So every nucleotide has a base, a sugar, and a phosphate group. Now, DNA, the 4 bases that you can have, you've probably recognized these, your A's, T's, C's, and G's. Now, we group the A's, T's, C's, and G's into 2 different groups. Adenine and guanine are known as purines. And I'll tell you a clue shortly on how to remember how we group this together. Cytosine and thymine are pyrimidines. Now, how you remember which ones are purines, which ones are pyrimidines, and you're not going to have to spell those out or anything. Any word, all the words that have a Y in it are all grouped together. So cytosine has a Y in it, thymine has a Y in it, and the word pyrimidine has a Y in it. There you go. They all have a Y. The purines have no Ys. Now, why that becomes important on purines and pyrimidines, there's always one purine that pairs up with a pyrimidine. Now, my little note on it, there is a reason for it. Purines are smaller bases. Pyrimidines are bigger bases. Makes sense too, the word purine smaller, pyrimidine's bigger. We always have one smaller base that pairs up with a bigger base. Any guess why? Why you want one smaller pairing up with one bigger? Now, I'll draw this out and I'll show you. And so, Mike, if I draw a purine, we're going to say a purine, because it's smaller, it gets 1 circle. And a pyrimidine, which is bigger, gets 2 circles. And they're going to pair up. So I'm always going to have one small thing pairing up with one big thing. Now, what happens if I have one small thing pairing up with one small thing, or if I have 2 big things pairing up with 2 big things? It's not even in width anymore. And I'm like, so we always have one big thing pairing up with one small thing, and so that the DNA stays the exact same width. And I'm like, now, if you remember the rules, what pairs up with what? A's and T's and C's and G's, which makes sense. Adenine's a purine. Purine, a small thing. The thymine is the T, it's a pyrimidine. One small thing with one big thing. So we've all learned at some point probably, or this sounds familiar, that C's pair up with G's and A's pair up with T's, and you really had no idea why. You're just like, sure, because my teacher told me that. It's because the bases, one is always small, one's always big, and it keeps them the same width. I was going to say, it tells you up there what it pairs up with. Now, DNA, it's also double-stranded. Again, you've got one strand that has, a whole bunch of bases on one side, and the other side has all the bases on the other side that pair up. It's a helix. Does anyone know what the word helix means? It's like because it curls up and it looks like the old-fashioned telephone cord. You guys all have. I'm going to date myself. How many of you have had a phone that had the old-fashioned telephone cord? Okay, most of you. Okay, good. Eventually, it's going to get to be like, what? Phones had cords? That's going to happen one day. It always has the sugar. The sugar in DNA is known as deoxyribose. What do you think the sugar is called in RNA? Ribose. We just take off the deoxy. And DNA is very important, which we get into in like 2 lectures, because it provides all the instructions for making proteins. Proteins are kind of like, what makes the world all go around, and it's what makes our cells all work. It's all the different proteins that are in our body that do lots of different things. DNA allows our cells to make proteins. I didn't bring my clicker over. I didn't hook my clicker up. So, little picture of DNA. You can see it's two-stranded. Those are the two purple lines. You can see that you're going to have one bigger pyrimidine pairing up with one smaller purine, and it will do that as it goes throughout, keeping the same width, but it twists. And so the bases always stick in towards together so they can pair up. On the outside, the little part that always hangs out outside, this is where you're going to find your sugar and your phosphate group. So we even call it a sugar-phosphate backbone. That hangs out on the outside. The bases stick towards the middle so that they can pair up with each other, so that one strand will stick to the other strand. Now, my little note. The two bases are attached together using a hydrogen bond. What do you know about hydrogen bonds? They're very weak. That's good for us, because at some point we're going to have to rip apart the DNA and copy it to do various things. And so the fact that it's stuck together with a very weak bond works out very well for us. We can rip apart the DNA strands and make copies of it, and then they can go right back together. Now, RNA, it also has 4 bases, just like DNA did. However, one of them is different. Which one's different? It has uracil, and it's missing the T. It's missing the thymine, so it has uracil now. The sugar that we find in RNA is now called ribose. In DNA was deoxyribose. In RNA, it's ribose. It's a single-stranded molecule, and it hangs out outside of the nucleus. DNA never leaves the nucleus. Again, it's like your important laptop at home that has all your important information, your social security number, all your bank account numbers. It's got everything you possibly need. You don't want that laptop to leave your house. Same thing. DNA contains all that important information. It does not leave the nucleus. It needs to stay protected there. However, RNA, it starts in the nucleus and leaves the nucleus, and it hangs mostly outside of the nucleus in the cytoplasm. Also, another difference between DNA and RNA. RNA, I'm like, it helps with making protein. However, there are 3 different types of RNA. DNA, there's just one DNA. RNA, there are 3 types of RNA. There's a messenger RNA. We just shorten it to mRNA. There's transfer RNA, shorten it for tRNA. And then there's ribosomal RNA. Again, the little rRNA. They all have their specific function, all helping with protein synthesis. We'll get more into protein synthesis. X class periods? 2 class periods? Something like that coming up. We're not going to watch that. Now, what I'm going to have you work on, you should have this in your PowerPoint, yes? Yes. Okay, good. You can work with a partner on this. List at least 3 things in each section. Now, have you done these before, these Venn diagrams? So in this DNA section, write 3 things at least. At least there's way more than 3. The things that are unique to just DNA. On this side, write 3 things that are unique for just RNA. In the middle, write 3 things that RNA and DNA share. What do they have in common? So lots of different things that they, share in common, lots of different things that are unique to them.
What's the NA?
Nucleic acid. They're both nucleic acids. And another big molecule, so DNA and RNA, those are our big nucleic acids. Our last organic compound is adenosine triphosphate, also known as ATP. Again, because it has the name triphosphate, what does triphosphate mean? It has 3 phosphate groups. These are the 3 phosphate groups. Why ATP is so important? Yes, it is the energy that powers all the chemical reactions in the cell. So our body runs on ATP. And everyone's like, I thought it ran on sugar. Kind of. And I'm like, because, we'll get it maybe more on the next slide. Sugar is the energy that makes the ATP. So ATP drives all the reactions, but we can't make ATP without sugar. So sugar is the energy that makes ATP, and ATP is the energy that our cells can use to do all the different types of chemical reactions in the body. It's a very readily available energy source. Why it has so much energy is because of these 3 phosphates at the end. Again, here's the triphosphate part of it. I really don't care anything about the adenosine part. I care about the 3 phosphates. I have my little squiggles here. These are high energy phosphate bonds. When I break a bond, I release energy. Do you remember what type of energy that's called? Chemical energy. Energy stored in bonds is chemical energy. This is a type of chemical energy. It is energy stored in bonds. I break a bond, I release energy. So if I break this phosphate off, this last phosphate, what does ATP become? ADP, and it becomes adenosine diphosphate. Now, you can break 2 phosphates off. What do you think it would become? It'd be the monophosphate. Now, my little note, generally that doesn't happen. Usually 1 phosphate breaks off, we eat some type of food, and we can put that phosphate right back on, and it just does a whole cycle of ATP, ADP, eat something, go back to ATP, and it does a whole cycle. It's very rare, but it does happen that we can break off another phosphate to release even more energy. It just doesn't happen very often. There's a few chemical reactions in the body where we do, but usually we just break off 1 ATP, use the energy that's released, we eat some type of sugar, we've got fuel source built up in our body, and we start back over again with ATP. Now the process of sticking that phosphate on is known as phosphorylation. Anytime you stick a phosphate onto the end of something, you're giving that new molecule lots and lots of energy by sticking that last phosphate on. So terminal phosphates, what do you think the word terminal means? The end. If you have terminal cancer, the end. But I'm like, oh, terminal phosphates. These are the phosphates that are on the end, the ones we're going to stick to the end of diphosphate to make a triphosphate. We're going to use some type of, enzymes. We're going to use energy, such as the energy in sugar, shove that phosphate on there, and now we've energized that molecule by having that extra phosphate on the end. So they say that these molecules are now primed. They've got lots of energy in that last chemical bond, and we can break it and do work wherever we need to in the body. So phosphorylation, sticking a phosphate onto the end of something, such as ATP. There are other molecules you can stick phosphates on in the body as well. ATP, ADP is the most common one. These are just some of the examples where we use ATP in the body. 1, active transport, which I don't think we're going to get to today. Active transport, if you remember, anytime we go from a low concentration and shove things and move them where there's a higher concentration, things don't like to be concentrated, we need ATP. When our muscles contract, we need ATP. We'll get more into that when we do muscle contraction. Or any type of chemical work. We are constantly building new molecules and breaking molecules down in our body. That takes energy as well. So ATP is used to take A and B and shove them together, and now we've got this new molecule. And a lot of times you see there's energy in a phosphate, it leaves, it's just breaking a phosphate off. So we use ATP all over our body to lots and lots of different types of chemical reactions. All right, some review. Some of this from last time, though. So pull out the colored note cards. If you're like, I have no idea where they are, I can't help you because I thought I had some, but I don't. So the 4 major organic compounds that comprise our body are what? Now I'm going to do a clue because I'm like, organic compounds, which means what? Carbon-based. It is orange. I saw lots of greens out there because everyone's like, but they're the 4. These are the 4 elements that make up our body, the 4 major organic compounds that comprise our body. Protein, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acid. Because does hydrogen have carbon in it? No, and oxygen doesn't either, and nitrogen, it's their own elements. Tricky. The major function of carbohydrates in the body is for what? Yes, as cellular fuel. The major building blocks for proteins are what? It is the pink, amino acids. We string amino acids together to eventually make a big, huge protein. And how many different amino acids are there? 20. We just change them up in different orders. The major building blocks of nucleic acids are what? The nucleotides. The nucleotides, the yellow, the nucleotides are the monomers that make the nucleic acids, whether it's DNA or RNA. What are the three things you find in a nucleotide? Sugar, phosphate, and a base. And I'm like, you know, the bases can change between DNA and RNA, but they're going to have some type of sugar, which can be different, but as a sugar, they don't always have a phosphate group. But nucleotides are the monomers that make up the polymers of DNA and RNA. What are the 4 DNA nucleotides based on their base? Yeah, you guys all have it. It's the adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. So we name the nucleotides based on the base that they're attached to. End of that PowerPoint.